You inherit 127 acres of pristine farmland from your grandfather, complete with rolling hills, a crystal clear creek, and generations of family history. You're planning to build your dream home and maybe start a small organic farm. Then you discover that the Willowbrook Heights HOA has secretly built an entire neighborhood, 96 luxury homes worth $45 million, right on your property. And here's the kicker. They've been collecting HOA fees, property taxes, and selling these homes for 3 years without owning a single square foot of the land. I'm Marcus Chen, and this is the story of how I accidentally became the landlord of the most entitled HOA in America, and how they wished they'd never messed with a guy who spent 10 years as a real estate attorney before inheriting the family farm. Before we dive in, let me know where you're watching from today. The certified letter arrived on a Tuesday morning in March 2023, and I nearly threw it away, thinking it was junk mail. The return address read Willowbrook Heights Homeowners Association, a name that meant absolutely nothing to me. I was sitting in my Chicago apartment, still processing the fact that I'd inherited my late grandfather's 127-acre property in rural Indiana 3 months earlier. Dear Mr. Chen, the letter began. This is to inform you that your property at 1247 Oak Haven Drive is in violation of HOA covenants regarding lawn maintenance, exterior paint color, and unauthorized livestock. You have 30 days to comply or face a $500 daily fine. I read it 3 times, my coffee growing cold in my hand. Oak Haven Drive? My grandfather's property was on County Road 42, a dirt path that barely qualified as a road. There were no neighbors for miles, just endless cornfields and the old farmhouse where he'd lived for 60 years. And livestock? The only animals on that property were the occasional deer and whatever critters lived in the creek. My first instinct was to call the HOA directly, but something nagged at me. As a real estate attorney, albeit one who'd been taking a sabbatical since inheriting the farm, my paranoia kicked in. Instead of calling, I decided to drive down to Indiana and see what was happening for myself. The 3-hour drive from Chicago gave me plenty of time to think. Grandpa had been sharp as a tack until the day he died, and he'd never mentioned any HOA or development near his property. He'd bought those 127 acres back in 1962 with money he'd saved from his job at the steel mill, and it had been his pride and joy. The thought of some HOA claiming authority over his land made my blood boil. When I turned off the highway onto the familiar county roads, everything looked normal at first. The same rolling hills, the same patches of woods, the same old red barn visible in the distance. But as I got closer to what should have been the entrance to Grandpa's property, I saw something that made me pull over and stare. A massive stone entrance gate stood where there used to be nothing but a cattle guard and a weathered mailbox. Brass letters spelled out Willowbrook Heights in elegant script, and beyond the gate I could see perfectly manicured streets, sidewalks, and rows upon rows of identical 2-story colonial houses. My grandfather's property, my property, had been transformed into a sprawling suburban neighborhood. I sat in my car for 20 minutes, trying to process what I was seeing. According to the deed I'd inherited, I owned everything from the creek on the east side to the tree line on the west, and from County Road 42 all the way back to the old quarry, exactly 127 acres. But someone had built an entire subdivision right in the middle of it. My hands shaking with adrenaline, I called my grandfather's old lawyer, Harold Brennan, who'd handled the estate. He picked up on the second ring. Harold, it's Marcus Chen. I need you to pull out the original survey for Grandpa's property and meet me there as soon as possible. Marcus, what's wrong? You sound upset. Someone built a neighborhood on the farm, Harold. 96 houses from what I can count, and they're claiming HOA authority over property I own. There was a long pause. That's impossible. I handled your grandfather's estate myself. The property boundaries are crystal clear, and there's never been any development approved for that area. Then you need to see this for yourself. Can you meet me here in an hour? Harold arrived with a folder thick with documents and a GPS device for precise boundary mapping. What we discovered over the next 3 hours would have been hilarious if it wasn't so infuriating. The Willowbrook Heights development was built entirely on my inherited land. Not just partially, but completely. Every single house, every street, the community center, the playground, even the entrance gate sat squarely within my property boundaries. The original survey from 1962 was rock solid. Harold had verified it against county records when processing the estate. But somehow, between then and now, someone had managed to develop 96 luxury homes without ever purchasing the land from my grandfather or his estate. "This is the biggest property law violation I have ever seen," Harold said, consulting his GPS device as we stood in what was supposed to be my backyard but was now the Willowbrook Heights Community Center. "Either this is the most expensive mistake in development history, or someone committed massive fraud." That evening, I checked into a motel in the nearby town and started making calls. The county clerk's office, the building department, the tax assessor. I needed to understand how this had happened. What I learned over the next several phone calls made the situation even more bizarre. According to county records, all 96 homes had been properly permitted and inspected. Property taxes were being paid, not by me, but by the individual homeowners. The development had been approved by the Planning Commission in 2019, with all proper environmental impact studies and infrastructure planning. Everything appeared legitimate from the county's perspective. Except for one tiny detail. The developer, Pinnacle Communities LLC, had never actually purchased the land they built on. The next morning, I decided to take a direct approach. I drove through the gates of Willowbrook Heights, my own property, I kept reminding myself, and parked in front of the HOA office, a converted house near the entrance with Community Management painted on a discreet sign. The office was decorated like a real estate showroom, all granite counters and leather furniture. Behind the reception desk sat a woman in her 50s with perfectly styled blonde hair and a smile that could sell ice to penguins. "Good morning. I'm Jennifer Walsh, Willowbrook Heights Community Manager. How can I help you today?" "I'm Marcus Chen. You sent me this letter." I placed the violation notice on her desk. Her smile faltered slightly as she read the address. "Oh yes, 1247 Oak Haven Drive. Mr. Chen, I have to say your property is quite the eyesore in our beautiful community. We pride ourselves on maintaining property values. And frankly, your neglect is affecting everyone's investment. I'm sorry, but I think there's been some confusion. That's my property, all of it. This entire development is built on land I inherited from my grandfather." Jennifer's laugh was like wind chimes in a hurricane, pretty but ominous. "Mr. Chen, I understand you might be confused, but you own one residential lot in our community. You don't own the development. That's just silly." I pulled out the deed Harold had given me and spread it across her desk. "This deed says I own 127 acres, from here to there." I pointed to the boundaries marked on the attached survey. "Your entire neighborhood is sitting on my land." For the first time, Jennifer's smile disappeared entirely. She studied the documents with growing alarm, then excused herself to make a phone call in the back office. Through the thin walls, I could hear her urgent whispers, though I couldn't make out the words. She returned 5 minutes later with a different demeanor entirely. Less customer service, more cornered animal. "Mr. Chen, this is obviously some kind of clerical error. Our residents have invested millions of dollars in their homes here. You can't just claim to own an entire established neighborhood. I'm going to have to ask you to leave and contact our legal team if you want to pursue this misunderstanding." "I'm not pursuing anything. I am the legal owner of this land. What I want to know is how you built 96 homes without ever buying the property from my family." Jennifer's face had gone pale. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to leave now, or I'll call security." "Security?" I looked around the office. "You mean the security guards patrolling my property?" That's when the door opened, and in walked the most entitled-looking man I had ever seen. Tall, silver-haired, wearing a golf shirt that probably cost more than most people's car payments, with the kind of tan that comes from country club memberships and Florida winter homes. Is there a problem here, Jennifer? His voice carried the authority of someone used to being obeyed without question. Mr. Whitmore, this is Marcus Chen. He's claiming to own the entire development. Bradford Whitmore. I learned his name from the business card he immediately handed me. Was the HOA president and, according to the card, community visionary. He looked at the deed on Jennifer's desk, and his expression shifted from annoyance to calculation. Mr. Chen, I am sure we can work this out like reasonable adults. Property disputes happen all the time in development. Usually, it's just a matter of updating records and paying some back fees. Why don't we sit down and discuss compensation? Compensation? For what? Well, you've been enjoying the benefits of living in our community. The maintained roads, security patrols, landscaping services. Our annual HOA fee is $3,200 per home. Since you claim to own all 96 lots, that would be, let me see, $307,200 per year. For 3 years, plus late fees and interest, you owe the community approximately $1.1 million. I stared at him, wondering if he was serious. You built houses on my land without my permission, and now you want me to pay you. Bradford's smile was the kind politicians use when they're about to raise your taxes. Mr. Chen, I think you're misunderstanding the situation. These residents invested their life savings in these homes based on the guarantee of community standards. They have rights too. We can't just let someone waltz in and disrupt a thriving neighborhood because of some old paperwork. Old paperwork? This is a legal deed registered with the county. Listen, Bradford leaned back in his chair like he was about to offer me the deal of the century. I'll tell you what we're willing to do. We'll waive the back HOA fees and give you a $50,000 settlement for any inconvenience. In return, you deed the property to the HOA, and we'll give you a nice lot at the edge of the development to build your house. Everyone wins. The audacity was breathtaking. They had built on my land illegally, and now they wanted me to pay them for the privilege of living on a corner of my own property. Mr. Whitmore, let me make something very clear. I own this land. Every house here was built without my permission. Legally, you're all trespassers. Bradford's friendly demeanor evaporated like morning dew. Now see here, son. I've been developing properties for 30 years. You can't just come in here throwing around legal threats. These people have mortgages, families, investments. The bank isn't going to foreclose on 96 families because some kid with an old deed thinks he owns the whole neighborhood. The bank? That was interesting. What bank holds the mortgages on houses built on land that was never legally sold? For just a moment, Bradford looked like a deer in headlights. Then he recovered with the skill of a career politician. That's between the homeowners and their lenders. The point is, Mr. Chen, you need to be realistic. This is a $45 million development. You're not going to evict an entire neighborhood. The courts won't allow it. The community won't stand for it, and frankly, you don't have the resources to fight us. I stood up and gathered the deed from Jennifer's desk. Mr. Whitmore, I spent 10 years as a real estate attorney. I know exactly what my resources are and exactly what the law says about property rights. You have 30 days to come up with a reasonable purchase offer for the land you're occupying, or I'll be forced to pursue other options. Other options? Bradford's voice had gone cold. Eviction notices, trespassing charges, civil litigation for 3 years of unpaid rent on a $45 million development. I paused at the door. Oh, and Mr. Whitmore, you might want to check with your insurance company about coverage for construction on illegally occupied land. I have a feeling your homeowners are going to have some very interesting conversations with their insurers when this gets out. As I walked to my car, I could hear heated whispers from inside the office. Bradford was already on his phone, and Jennifer was frantically pulling files from her desk drawers. I had fired the first shot in what would become the most expensive property dispute in county history, but I had no idea just how deep this rabbit hole would go, or how many laws Bradford Whitmore had broken to build his perfect little kingdom on my grandfather's farm. That night in my motel room, I couldn't sleep. Instead, I sat at the small desk with my laptop and started digging. As a real estate attorney, I knew that a development this large couldn't exist in a legal vacuum. Someone had to have filed papers, obtained permits, secured financing. The paper trail would tell me everything I needed to know. I started with the county records database. Every property transaction, every permit application, every zoning change is public record if you know where to look. What I found over the next 6 hours of searching made my head spin. In March 2019, Pinnacle Communities, LLC had filed an application to develop the Willowbrook Heights Master Plan Community on 127 acres of land described as Parcel 23001045. The application included detailed site plans, environmental impact studies, and infrastructure drawings. It had been approved by the County Planning Commission in June 2019 by a vote of 6-1. But here's where it got interesting. Pinnacle's application claimed ownership of the land through a purchase from Chen Family Holdings LLC for $2.3 million in February 2019. There was just one problem. Chen Family Holdings LLC didn't exist. I'd never heard of it, my grandfather had never mentioned it, and when I searched the Secretary of State's business registry, there was no record of any such company ever being incorporated. Someone had forged a land sale to justify building a $45 million development. I called Harold immediately, despite it being 2 a.m. "Harold, wake up! Someone forged a deed to steal Grandpa's property." "Marcus, do you know what time it is?" "Harold, listen to me. I found the county records. Pinnacle Communities claimed they bought the land from Chen Family Holdings LLC in February 2019. Does that name mean anything to you?" There was a long pause as Harold processed this information. "Marcus, your grandfather never incorporated any business entity. He owned that land individually until the day he died. Then, someone committed massive fraud to steal 127 acres and build a subdivision on it." Jesus Christ. Harold was fully awake now. "Marcus, if what you're saying is true, this isn't just a property dispute. This is criminal fraud on a scale I've never seen." The next morning, I drove to the county courthouse and requested every document related to the Willowbrook Heights development. The clerk, an elderly woman named Dorothy, who'd apparently been working there since the Roosevelt administration, was incredibly helpful once I explained the situation. "Honey, I remember when that application came through," she said, pulling files from multiple cabinets. "Biggest development application we'd ever seen. The Planning Commission was so excited about the tax revenue and job creation." She spread the documents across a conference table, and I spent the next 4 hours photographing everything. The more I read, the more elaborate the fraud became. Not only had Pinnacle forged the initial land purchase, but they'd created an entire fake paper trail to support it. There were bogus environmental assessments signed by companies that didn't exist, engineering reports from consultants who couldn't be found, and financial guarantees from banks that had no record of issuing them. But the most shocking discovery was a document I found buried in the Planning Commission minutes from the approval meeting. One commissioner, Robert Harrison, had voted against the project and raised specific concerns about the legitimacy of the land ownership claim. "I move that we table this application until Pinnacle can provide certified documentation of their ownership claim," Harrison had stated according to the minutes. "The deed they've submitted raises several red flags, and I believe we need an independent title search before approving a project of this magnitude." His motion had been voted down 6-1, and the development was approved. But Harrison's concerns were documented in the official record, which meant at least one county official had suspected fraud from the beginning. I found Robert Harrison's phone number in the county directory and called him that afternoon. He agreed to meet me at a coffee shop in town, away from the courthouse. Harrison was a retired engineer in his 70s who'd served on the Planning Commission for 15 years. When I showed him the fake Chen Family Holdings LLC documents, his face flushed with anger. "I knew something was wrong with that application," he said. "The whole thing felt rushed, and Bradford Whitmore was pushing hard for immediate approval. He kept saying they had investors ready to pull out if we didn't approve quickly." Bradford Whitmore was involved in the planning process? Oh, he was more than involved. He practically ran the meetings when this project came up, made presentations, answered questions, acted like he was the developer himself. This was news to me. Bradford had presented himself as just the HOA president, but it sounded like he'd been involved from the very beginning. "Mr. Harrison, do you remember anything else about those meetings? Any other red flags?" Harrison thought for a moment, then pulled out his phone. I keep detailed notes on every case, partly for situations like this. He scrolled through files until he found what he was looking for. Here it is, June 15th, 2019 Planning Commission meeting. I noted that Whitmore seemed unusually familiar with the financial details of the project, construction costs, timeline, profit projections. That struck me as odd for someone who was supposed to just be representing future homeowners. What did you think was happening? Honestly, I thought Bradford was secretly part of Pinnacle Communities, maybe a silent partner or investor. The way he talked about our project and our investment sounded more like an owner than a resident advocate. I left that meeting with a new understanding of what I was up against. This wasn't just a case of mistaken property boundaries or sloppy paperwork. Bradford Whitmore had apparently orchestrated an elaborate fraud to steal my grandfather's land and build a development that made him and his partners millions of dollars. That evening, I called my old law firm in Chicago and spoke with my former partner, Sarah Martinez, who specialized in criminal fraud cases. "Sarah, I need your help with the biggest real estate fraud case you've ever seen." "Marcus, I heard you'd retired to become a farmer or something. What's going on?" I spent an hour walking her through everything I discovered. When I finished, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. "Marcus, if even half of what you're telling me is true, this is RICO territory. We're talking about conspiracy, fraud, forgery, possibly money laundering if they've been moving development profits through shell companies. What's my next move?" "Document everything. Get copies of every record you can find. And then we need to contact the FBI's white-collar crime unit. This is way beyond a civil property dispute." But before I could take Sarah's advice, Bradford Whitmore made a move that showed me just how desperate and dangerous he was becoming. The next morning I found a notice taped to my motel room door. The Willowbrook Heights HOA was filing for a restraining order against me, claiming I was harassing residents and disrupting community peace. According to the filing, I was prohibited from entering the development, contacting any residents, or making false claims about property ownership. Bradford was trying to use the legal system to keep me away from my own land while he figured out his next move. But he'd made a critical error. The restraining order application included his signature on a document claiming he had authority to act on behalf of all property owners in the Willowbrook Heights community. That signature was about to become evidence in a criminal case that would bring down not just Bradford Whitmore, but the entire network of conspirators who'd helped him steal 127 acres and build their perfect suburban dream on my grandfather's farm. The restraining order hearing was scheduled for the following Monday at the county courthouse. Bradford had hired a high-powered law firm from Indianapolis, while I represented myself with Harold as backup counsel. Walking into that courtroom, I felt like David facing Goliath. Except David didn't have a briefcase full of evidence proving Goliath was a criminal. Judge Patricia Hendricks had been on the bench for 25 years and had a reputation for no-nonsense proceedings. Bradford's attorney, a shark in an expensive suit named William Caldwell, opened with a theatrical presentation about protecting honest homeowners from harassment by an individual making outrageous property claims. "Your Honor," Caldwell proclaimed, "Mr. Chen is attempting to disrupt an established community of 96 families based on questionable documentation. His actions have caused significant distress to residents who invested their life savings in good faith." When it was my turn, I simply walked to the evidence table and began laying out documents. "Your Honor, I'd like to present evidence that the entire Willowbrook Heights development was built on land fraudulently obtained through forged documents and false representations to county officials." Judge Hendricks raised an eyebrow. "That's a serious accusation, Mr. Chen." "Yes, Your Honor, it is, and I can prove every word." For the next hour, I walked the judge through the paper trail. the non-existent Chen Family Holdings LLC, the forged deed of sale, the fake environmental studies, the planning commission member who'd raised red flags that were ignored, and finally, the smoking gun bank records I'd subpoenaed showing that Pinnacle Communities had received $12 million in construction loans secured by property they never legally owned. Bradford's face went from confident to concerned to panicked as the evidence mounted. His attorney kept objecting, but Judge Hendricks was clearly fascinated by the scope of the fraud. "Mr. Caldwell," the judge said, "does your client have any explanation for how his HOA came to be built on land that was never legally purchased?" Caldwell whispered urgently with Bradford, who was sweating despite the air conditioning. "Your Honor, this appears to be a title company error that we're only now discovering." "A title company error?" Judge Hendricks looked at the forged documents I'd presented. "Mr. Caldwell, these aren't clerical errors. These are fabricated companies and fictitious transactions." That's when Bradford made the mistake that sealed his fate. He stood up and interrupted his own attorney. "Your Honor, even if there were irregularities in the original paperwork, you can't destroy an entire community over technicalities. 96 families live here. Property values, mortgages, children's schools. You can't just pretend none of that matters because some old farmer didn't update his records properly." The courtroom went dead silent. Bradford had just admitted that he knew about the irregularities and dismissed them as mere technicalities. Judge Hendricks stared at him for a long moment. "Mr. Whitmore, are you telling this court that you were aware of problems with the property ownership when you built this development?" Bradford's attorney was frantically trying to get him to sit down, but it was too late. "I'm saying that the greater good sometimes requires practical solutions. We created jobs, brought tax revenue to the county, provided quality housing for families. Sometimes the law needs to be flexible when it serves the community." "The law needs to be flexible?" Judge Hendricks's voice could have frozen Lake Michigan. "Mr. Whitmore, the law is not flexible when it comes to fraud." Bailiff: "I want Mr. Whitmore held in contempt of court. And Mr. Chen, I'm dismissing this restraining order and ordering the county prosecutor to launch an immediate investigation into these allegations." But the real fireworks started after we left the courthouse. While I was giving a statement to the prosecutor's office, Sarah Martinez arrived from Chicago with an FBI agent named David Morrison, who specialized in construction fraud cases. Over the next week, the investigation exploded into the biggest criminal case in county history. FBI forensic accountants discovered that Bradford hadn't just stolen my grandfather's land. He'd been running a sophisticated fraud operation for years. Pinnacle Communities was owned by a shell company controlled by Bradford and two partners. They'd been identifying rural properties owned by elderly farmers, waiting for the owners to die, then forging sale documents during the probate process when families were distracted by grief and paperwork. My grandfather's land was their biggest score, but they'd pulled similar scams on at least 6 other properties across 3 states. The money trail was even more shocking. Bradford hadn't just stolen land, he'd been inflating construction costs, billing the HOA for services never provided, and skimming hundreds of thousands in community fees. The FBI found Swiss bank accounts, offshore shell companies, and real estate investments from California to Florida, all funded by what agents called the largest rural land theft operation in modern American history. But my favorite discovery was what happened when investigators interviewed the homeowners. Most of them had no idea their HOA president was a criminal, but they'd been suspicious of his lavish lifestyle for months. Bradford drove a different luxury car every few weeks, took monthly trips to Europe, and had recently bought a $2 million beach house in the Bahamas, all on an HOA president salary that should have been maybe $50,000 a year. Jennifer Walsh, the community manager, turned state's evidence immediately when the FBI showed up at her door. She'd been keeping detailed records of Bradford's financial shenanigans because she suspected he was stealing from the community and she wanted to protect herself. Her files provided prosecutors with evidence of mail fraud, wire fraud, money laundering, and racketeering. The homeowners' reactions when they learned the truth were exactly what you'd expect. panic about their mortgages, anger at being deceived, and genuine sympathy for what had happened to my family. A group of them actually showed up at my motel to apologize and ask what they could do to make things right. "Mr. Chen," said a woman named Patricia, who lived on what used to be my grandfather's favorite fishing spot. "We had no idea about any of this. We're victims too. Is there any way we can work together to solve this?" That conversation led to the most satisfying resolution I could have imagined. Instead of evicting 96 families, we worked out a deal that benefited everyone except the criminals who'd created this mess. The FBI's asset forfeiture investigation recovered over $8 million in stolen funds from Bradford's various accounts, combined with the insurance payouts when the banks discovered they'd issued mortgages on stolen land. There was enough money to purchase the developed portion of my property at fair market value, $4.5 million for 75 acres. The homeowners got to keep their houses. I got paid handsomely for land I'd never planned to develop anyway, and I still had 52 acres of beautiful farmland to build my dream house and start that organic farm I'd been planning. Bradford Whitmore was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison and ordered to pay $15 million in restitution. His partners got 8 years each, and Pinnacle Communities was dissolved with all assets distributed to victims. The county updated their approval processes to prevent similar frauds, and Commissioner Harrison was appointed to head a new title verification committee. 6 months later, I was breaking ground on my farmhouse, built on the original site my grandfather had chosen 60 years earlier. The Willowbrook Heights community, now renamed Grandpa Chen Memorial Estates at the residents' request, had elected a new HOA board that actually served the community instead of robbing it blind. And every morning when I drink my coffee on the front porch of the house my grandfather dreamed of, I can see 96 families living peacefully on land that's finally legally theirs. Sometimes the law isn't flexible, as Bradford learned the hard way. But justice? Justice can be surprisingly creative when honest people work together to make things right. The best part? The new HOA sends me a Christmas card every year, thanking me for saving their community from the man who would have eventually bankrupted them all. Bradford thought he was building his perfect little kingdom on stolen land. Instead, he built the evidence that sent him to prison and gave me the resources to honor my grandfather's memory in ways he never could have imagined.